Hey everyone, this tutorial is going to be another Cinema 4D tutorial that covers how to take our 3D type and make it look like it can integrate into a photographic scene, something like we see here. So it'll look like it's placed on the ground, having similar lighting and shadows that affect it as well. So let's get into it and see how we can do this. So I've got my Remember Me monument that I was working with. The first thing is I do want to go and move, which I've already done. I'm going to be using two different photo images here. So one of them is a photograph that I want to have the scene integrated into. So this photograph, I'm going to put my model in. Okay. And then we also created some photospheres which capture the building in the round. Now, this isn't quite located in the same spot as where I'm going to be photographing, but it's pretty close to that type of lighting I'm going to be working with. So this will work just fine for our purposes. Okay, I've got my Remember Me folder and my Remember Me Cinema 4D file. All of my assets or images I'm going to be using are in that folder as well. So just keep that in mind as you're moving forward. Okay, so what we are going to do is we are going to go in and first of all, we're going to add a sky object, okay? And we're going to take that photosphere and put it in the scene and try to get it to line up accordingly. So to do that, we're going to choose this menu, which looks like the floor, click and hold it down, and we're going to add a sky. It's not a physical sky, that's going to include lighting, which we don't need. This is going to be just a simple sky. The sky itself is a gigantic sphere that we are now inside of, okay? So within that, we need to add a material to that. So to create a material, we go down to the bottom menu, the materials menu, and do create new default material. Okay. So this is going to give us just a blank default light gray material. If we double click it here, we can open up the material editor, which is much easier to use. You can do it in the attributes manager as well, but I like to see this all in person. So for this material, which is going to be our reflections and our lighting and our environment, we're going to be using the luminance channel. So I'm going to turn off color, I'm going to turn off reflectance, I'm going to turn on luminance. Now to get the material on here, the photo on here, we're going to go to texture, click the little down arrow, go load image. Okay, in here, I'm going to find my folder and my image. There it is. Select that and click open. It may ask you if you want to save it in your file. You can say yes and continue. Okay. Now, if by chance this comes in backwards, which can sometimes happen, you can click on this again, go to layer. Okay. Nothing really happens. You click the icon again and you get this menu under shader. You click effect and transform. Here you can flip the image if you need to. I don't think we do, but if I needed to, I could mirror it so it would look the opposite direction, or I could flip it upside down in that case. All right, either of these I don't think I need, but that might be the case for the next material. Okay, we've got this material. We can drag it to two different places. We can either drag it out here to the sky itself, or we can drag it over here to the object manager and plop it right on top of the sky. So what you will see then is a blurry image of your scene. Here is the windows, there's the floor. Remember, it is kind of perspective because we put the camera on the floor, but this is the scene that we're working with. So I'm going to orient this. I think the window is there. So I'm going to kind of look into this corner because that's a little bit more as to how this is working. Now, you could rotate this way, and then you could rotate your model, or you could position the model how you want it to look, which I want it to look something like this. Then you can click on the sky itself and click and rotate it. So here, what I'm going to do is just click on the green axis, which is the y-axis, so I don't move anything else, and just rotate this around. Okay, so I'm just going to rotate this until I get that view, kind of something like that. That was similar to the other scene. Okay, so that's step one. Now, we don't, if we render this, this is the render button right here, render view. You can see it kind of does look like it's on the floor, which is a good start. but the background is pretty blurry with this low res image. So what we're going to do is bring in a different image to use as that background. Now, to hide the sky, what we are going to do is we are going to add a tag. Click on the sky, make sure that it has a yellow highlight, go to tags, go to render tags and compositing. Ultimately, this process is called photo compositing. So we're going to be using the compositing menu to help us out. Now we want everything about this except for seen by camera, because we want to keep the shadows and the reflections and the globe illumination, all that sort of stuff, and click off seen by camera. Now we're back to where we were. So the next step is we're going to bring in a background. Go to our floor menu again and drop in a background. Again, it's going to just give you that kind of default nothing color. So we need to create a new material. Create a new default material. Oh, by the way, what I might want to do is label these because they're all going to be material 1, 2, whatever. So let's call this photo here. Okay, and let's call this one background. Okay, so let's double click this one. And in this case, we do want this to be the color and we don't want the reflectance. Okay, so under color, we're going to go to the texture again and do load image. And let's locate the other flat image, this one. All right, so that looks pretty good. Hit open. Again, it might ask you to save a path. Now here I can see that this is upside down. So I am definitely going to need to add a layer. Click on this, effect, transform. And here I can definitely need to flip it and then mirror it. This looks correct in the icon, so I should be good to go. Okay, now let's take the background image and pop it on the background. Okay, and this is what we're looking at. So we render this, we can see a much clearer background image, but now the perspective does not look correct at all. So what to do? Let's orient the scene accordingly. So the first thing I'm going to do is grab the orbit camera and just rotate this around. And what I'm trying to do here is get the floor lines to line up with the lines of the floor that are existing in the photograph. Okay, so something like this is a good start, but I need to lower my perspective and then tip it down a little bit. Ultimately, that kind of like horizon line is essentially going to be the middle of your eyeballs, if you will. If that helps you sort of orient things. So I'm going to do this is looking, so this line back here is close to lining up with the wall. So I'm going to shift that a little bit. That is looking pretty good. Lines up pretty well there and there. And so I think this is something that I can work with. Now, the next thing we'll do is we can add a floor. So the floor is going to be something that we can pop in here to catch the shadows that may be there. So what I'm going to do is put a floor in, and this may, totally encumber our scene. So you can actually lower the floor down a little bit so it matches to the bottom of your model, which is good. Let's say right about there. Okay, and now we need to add a material to this as well. Okay, so we're going to add our background material to the floor. Okay, it's going to look like 1,000,000 pixels. So we are going to change the projection in the attributes manager to frontal. Okay, now if you click off of this and that goes away, all you need to do is go to the whatever material you're using and just click this object or the material tag once, and this will show up again. Okay, so we want frontal projection. Okay, and then we need to add a tag to this too. Now, if I rendered this, you notice that it's pretty good, but do you see this line in here? That line is because we need to add a little bit more compositing information to make this look more seamless. And that is going to be our compositing tag. So on the floor, highlight it, click it, go to tags, render tag and compositing. Then we're going to click this one, compositing background for HDR maps. Now, HDR maps is how we're going to light this using that photosphere that we talked about. So just click this checkbox. And if you do that and render it again, you can see that it's nice and clean once more. Okay, we're getting close. So before I add any materials to this, what I'm going to do with my text now is to orient it. Now, if you want this to move accordingly, you can either highlight both of these and move them around, or with them both highlighted, you can go to Object and Group Objects. That is going to create what's called a null. A null is almost like a folder. The great thing about a null is that you can manipulate it independently, and allows you to have more options as you go down. So you can manipulate each one of these independently, or you can manipulate the group as the null. So I'm just going to call this remember me, so I know what it is. Okay, and then those text images are in there as well. All right, now I've got my null selected. I'm going to rotate this a little bit more, and I'm going to move it back in space a little bit this way, and then I'm going to scale it up. Okay, so I want this to be a little bit more dynamic in the scene. Now, think about this when you're laying out your projects. You want this to be, dramatic shift, make something significant, even if it sort of like bursts a bit at the boundaries. What would be the perfect cropping in this scene? This is a little bit above my perspective, a little bit below my perspective. It looks like it's pretty monumental, which is good. I might just turn it a little bit more. That looks pretty good. Okay, I like it. I'm going to go with it. Let's look at this before we add any materials to it, just to see how the lighting works out. Okay, so we render this. We don't really have much lighting. It's kind of this generic lighting. It doesn't really match our scene. So let's integrate it. We are going to go to this little cog button right here, edit render settings. Okay, we're going to shift from standard to physical. It's going to give us more and more dynamic range. And then we need to add an effect. The effect is going to be called global illumination. And this is going to try to light our scene using that photosphere image that we've created. So go to preset, default, and I'm going to start out just with the interior preview. All right. We can always change that later on to refine it. So let's do that and render it and see what it looks like now. So it's going to take a little bit more time. But here you can already tell that we're getting a little bit more integrated quality of lighting. Notice how the direction of the light is kind of matching the direction of light in the scene. We're getting a little bit of the color of the light coming in. The way that it interacts with the ground is working pretty good. So this is a pretty good overall quality. I'm going to create a material. Let's do one more thing before we do that. I wanted to show you this as well. So if you needed a little bit more noise or a little bit more information, maybe where the surfaces meet one another, there's another effect you can add, which is going to add some render time, but it can be good, which is called ambient occlusion. And with the default settings, you can render this out. And what it's going to do is give us a little bit more information where surfaces meet one another, and perhaps on the ground as well. It might also give you a little bit more grain or grit, which can be good or bad depending on what your surfaces are like. Okay, so here what you can see is the crease in the E here, where it hits the ground there. It just gives it a little bit more physicality, which I think works in this setting. So we're going to keep that ambient occlusion up. Now let's talk a little bit about materials. We're going to add some materials to this, and then we'll go into refinements a little bit more in a further setting. So first off, I wanted to show a material that uses a bit of reflection. So let's make kind of a nice bright pink color under color. All right, and then let's go to reflectance. When you have reflectance on, it sounds like it should be reflected like a mirror, but that is not the case. It's going to have this specular reflectance, which kind of gives an overall surface sheen. In order to make this look really reflective, what I'm going to do is add another layer. So if we click add to the layers, you can click, I'm going to use GGX. And this is going to give you something that is pretty reflective. So I'm going to drop the percentage of this a little bit so I can see the color come through a little bit better. And then under roughness, I'm going to bring this down to 0. So now I have this like highly kind of polished kind of color. Might also change the reflection color. Let's see what happens if we just give it a little shot of red. That looks pretty good. Okay. You don't have to do this, but see what it's done to the highlights. It's brightened them up a little bit, giving a little bit more of that pink kind of color. Okay, so that material, why don't we put that on the ME down here? I can even just drag this onto the model, all right? There we go. And then remember, let's make a different material for that. So we're going to make something maybe a little bit darker color, maybe more of a violet. Okay. That looks pretty good. And then for this one, why don't we make it just ever so slightly transparent? Let's see what that will do. It's going to give you this 100% transparent. I'm going to bring it down a little bit. It has refraction presets. You can have all kinds of different things. Let's try sapphire. Sure. Okay. You can just experiment with this. It's a lot of this is just pushing buttons and see what happens. All right, let's do a remember with that purple. We'll see what this looks like. Okay. One super reflective, one more translucent. Let's see how this renders out. This might take a little bit of time. We'll see how quick it goes. Because you're adding the reflection, there's more information to calculate, but the reflection should show us the photosphere and all that information that's reflected around it. Okay, so I can already tell we're getting some good information there. Right, so we're getting like some of the windows, we're getting the reflection of the floor. So there's some great information that's coming through on the reflective part. Translucent one is taking a bit longer. We might just pause this so you don't have to sit through it. Okay, so look at what we've got. We've got this reflected scene, reflecting the windows, reflecting the floor. The purple, not as translucent as I had hoped, but it has some translucency to it. And it looks like it integrates pretty well into our scene. Okay, so that is, the nuts and bolts of how to work with photo compositing. I will share this file on the Google Drive so you can access it and tweak it if you need to, or add other things to it. So I'll pause here, and then the next video will cover about a little bit about fine tuning and some how to render to a JPEG. Okay, all for now.